Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to this month's webinar, Supercharge Your Fundraising Board. My name is Christine Kim, and I am the project coordinator for the Fundraising Academy. I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during, as well as a 30-minute Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the Q&A option within your Zoom controls. The chat function can also be used for community shares, or if you can just put that into the Q&A as well, you can upvote or comment on each other's questions. In the days following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the slide deck and the recording to view again at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At Fundraising Academy Cause Selling Education, we enhance fundraiser skills so they can develop and sustain donor relationships to advance their cause in today's growing giving landscape through a proven contemporary curriculum presented by world-class nonprofit fundraising leaders. We want to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Please check our website to find an institute in your community. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Hannah Berger, Director of Individual Giving and Communications for A Place Called Home. Hannah is an active member of the organization's executive management and directs all programs and initiatives related to the agency's annual fund, major gifts, and donor stewardship programs. Hannah is also currently at the helm of a $20 million campus expansion campaign for A Place Called Home, providing strategic oversight, direction, and coaching to optimize prospect identification, cultivation efforts, and successful major gift solicitations. An expert at revitalizing fundraising programs to realize exponential growth, Hannah is skilled at building authentic relationships with donors and thoroughly enjoys coaching other professional fundraisers to do the same. Using a no-nonsense, heart-centered approach to instruction, Hannah finds joy in coaching nonprofit leaders in classrooms as a philanthropy coach to turn their passion for the community, connection, and justice into strategic goal setting and effective daily action. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Christine. Can you give me screen sharing permissions, please?
Of course.
Welcome, everyone. So excited to see all 73 and counting of you with us here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I am seeing some familiar names in the participant list. So for those of you that I've met and worked with before, so good to see you again. Glad you're here. And for those of you that are brand new to me or the Fundraising Academy, welcome. I've been an instructor now for, about 3 years in the program. And I really enjoy the time that I get to spend with my colleagues through the Fundraising Academy in San Diego and around the country. So with that, I'm going to pull up our slides and we will dive in. I encourage you to use the chat function, use the Q&A. Christine will be monitoring. We will have lots and lots of time for questions at the end, but she'll be keeping a close eye on the chat to make sure we're getting to everything we need to. Christine, how do my slides look?
They look pretty good.
Okay. So our objectives for today are threefold. We're going to talk first about what makes a strong board. Oftentimes, as Christine shared, I am the Senior Director of Individual Giving and Communications at A Place Called Home here in Los Angeles. But I also have a consulting practice where I work as an executive coach, and I also will sometimes take on clients that are doing major special campaigns, capital campaigns, scholarship campaigns, things of that nature. And a lot of the time I'll encounter people who are, say their greatest pain point is their board. And I'm always a big fan of challenging that because I think that, one, if we really dive into working with boards, if we're development staff, as a partnership, right? We see it as an opportunity to both educate and work as accountability partners. There's really no board that can't be sort of turned into an amazing, enthusiastic fundraising body, right? But today we're going to talk a little bit about if we're recruiting, if we're starting fresh, or if we are rebooting our board, what do we want to take a look at to ensure that we create a really strong board of directors? We're also going to talk about how to establish those expectations around fundraising from the very beginning of our relationship with working with board members. And then I'll give you some techniques for board engagement and fundraising that'll help really streamline things for you and create greater efficiency. Before I go any further, Christine, can we pop up that poll we talked about doing?
Yes, we can. I'm going to launch a poll, so you should be able to select an answer on your screen. So our question is, just to get a feel of the room, if you could please answer how many years of fundraising experience that you have. So the options are 0 to 3 years, you are new fundraising staff. 4 to 10 years, you are an experienced fundraiser. Over 10 years, maybe you're a professional executive or a professional, or maybe you are just a volunteer fundraiser and board member. So if you could please select your options, and then I'll read out the responses to you, Hannah.
Great, thank you.
So almost everyone has voted. I'll give it a couple more seconds in case you all are still trying to vote.
Also, while we're doing that, you may notice that we're using closed captioning today. We always want to try to be as inclusive as possible, but this is sort of a test run. So if at any point you're using the closed captioning and finding it helpful, but perhaps I'm speaking too fast, please feel free to drop me a note in the chat or raise your hand to let us know. I do have a tendency to speak a little quickly when I get going. So I appreciate your support with that in advance.
Thank you. Okay, I will be closing. So I can share these results. Are you seeing them, Hannah, on your end? Perfect.
Yes. Okay, we've got a good mix today. 11 of you folks are volunteer fundraisers or board members, gold stars all around. Hopefully you're here not only to identify ways that you can get more active and engaged in fundraising with your nonprofits, but to be a great peer resource for your other board members. We've got 20 folks who are at that expert 10+ year level, 21 folks who are in that sort of mid space, 4 to 10 years, and 22 of you identified as new fundraising staff. Incredible. Okay, I will do my best to make sure that what I share today touches all levels. But again, please jump in, ask questions. I want to make this, I know we're doing it webinar style, but I want to make this as engaged and interactive as possible. Okay, so if you are familiar with Fundraising Academy, you're probably familiar with the cause selling cycle. This is our 3-phase, 8-step approach to relationship-driven fundraising. Now, why do I share this in this particular session? It's because as fundraising professionals or as volunteer fundraisers, the more we can engage our board members in each of these steps, the better off we'll be, right? So phase 1, that's all about identifying and qualifying our potential donors, right? Phase 2 is when we actually make that introduction, we get to meet them, we identify what their needs are, what's driving their philanthropic decision-making. We present them with our case for support, right? What it is that we do, our mission, our vision for the future, and how they can invest. And we talk through any potential objections that they might have around what it is that we're hoping they will invest in. And then our last phase is all about actually making the solicitation, gaining their partnership, their new investment, and then stewarding that relationship well. Now, we're going to talk through each of these steps again, specifically to how we can engage our board members to really get efficient at deepening the relationships that we're creating with our donors. Okay. So you may have also seen this if you've got our cause selling textbook. This is a comparison of traditional fundraising versus the cause selling approach. So on your left, you're looking at the traditional model. It's really all about talking. It's a little bit of that like old school sales always be closing approach, right? Where we're always asking for a gift and we're not really investing the time to understand what really drives the donor, and really focus on creating a lasting relationship, not just a transaction. Okay, our board members can be key in really sort of driving home this focus on building trust and relationships, as opposed to just these one-off transactions, right? Now, why do we care so much about relationships, right? Why are we always sort of preaching the gospel of it's all about that individual connection? It's because it's also a good business model, right? If we're only focused on the transaction, if we're only selling that ticket, getting that $1,000 donation, we're not really knowing who's behind the money or the gift that comes through our website. We're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're not able to sustainably fund our mission, right? If we get to know the people, what drives them, what their real capacity is, who's in their network, if we gain their trust and there's a loyalty built, that turns into a funder who will show up time and time and time again. And if there's anything that the last year or so has taught us, it's that having those relationships in place can be the difference between barely surviving a major crisis or ending up with an organization that is absolutely thriving and delivering on a very important mission, right? Okay, so let's talk about how to create a stellar board that supports your fundraising activity and ultimately your mission fulfillment. Okay, board recruitment. There's a few things we want to touch on here. Let's say we're starting over from scratch, or perhaps you need to add to your current board of directors. You want to make sure you're asking yourself, what does the organization need right now? What do we already have that's working really well? And where are the gaps that we need to fill? Okay. We want to make sure that we've got roles and responsibilities that are clearly laid out so that when we are going out to recruit new board members, we're able to give them a job description. We're able to give them a really strong idea of exactly what is expected of them as a participant on the board, right? If you recruit someone to take on a leadership role and you don't give them the tools or the training or the information that they need to be well prepared, they will not show up for you the way that you want them to. That's just a given. We want to make sure that we have our code of ethics codified and that it's something that our board members are able to review before applying to becoming a board member, right? They should be asked to acknowledge the code of ethics by actually, signing a document if they do become an active board member. And that should include a conflict of interest statement. It's happened more times than I care to be true that I've encountered board members who think a really smart way to grow their business is to become a volunteer leader and then sell that nonprofit on their business. That's not really okay. There might be some instances where you can make it work, but generally speaking, it would require the board member to give those services for free, right? So all of that to say, if we have a conflict of interest statement already in place, that's a conversation that we have right up front. And it helps us ensure that we're not recruiting somebody who has the wrong ideas about how they can help serve the organization. Succession planning. It's a really hot topic for me right now in the different organizations I run. And I feel like we're finally getting to a space in the nonprofit sector where we're starting to normalize succession planning. And what that is when leadership changes over, instead of it being like this dirty little secret, and it suddenly looks like this well-respected leader is moving on to a different role, we're talking about it in public. We're planning for it. We are gearing up and educating our staff and our board members to elegantly navigate change management, right? So succession planning, being able to talk about that when we recruit board members, what it looks like, what board terms are, if they're renewable, how the board member can be supported in transitioning onto and off of the board or into an officer role, right? Your president, your vice president, your secretary, your treasurer, right? And then how the board supports the staff in executive management transitions, okay? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, also a very hot topic right now. We are seeing that, a lot of nonprofit boards, I particularly work mostly in California, right? I have a client in the Bay Area right now, I have a client in San Diego, and then I work full-time in Los Angeles. And I am seeing that a lot of the boards are finally reckoning with the fact that they might not reflect the communities that their mission serves. Representation matters. Hopefully I'm preaching to the choir on that. And, a lot of organizations are putting into place policies so that they can actively recruit more diverse board members who are bringing to the table, diversity of perspective, of professional experience, of ethnicity, of religious backgrounds. And I'm advising all of my clients to actually do some really intentional work about policies and bylaws so that they have that supporting documentation to refer back to anytime they're out there recruiting and onboarding, right? And then prospecting. This is a really key one when it comes to fundraising. I always recommend that the director of development or the senior development fundraising person on the staff work really closely with the board members that are over governance and recruitment. Why is that? It's because the development professional, in theory, would have all this great prospecting knowledge. They know who their current donors are. They know who they want their donors to be. And that way you can kind of hone in together on who has that network and can make those beautiful connections, right? Okay. Let's talk for a few minutes about board responsibilities, just so we make sure we're clear. So what do boards do? They're not just a body of people who show up and come to events and maybe write a check, right? They have a really large legal responsibility over nonprofit organizations. So first and foremost, your board determines your mission and purpose, right? They might not be in the day-to-day operations or the weeds, if you will, but they do exist to determine what the mission of your organization is and what your strategic purpose is. They select the chief executive, right? Your CEO or your executive director. They should also be supporting and evaluating the chief executive, right? That's includes not just annual evaluations, but also ongoing partnership around ensuring mission delivery. They ensure effective planning. So a strategic planning process should always involve your board of directors, right? That should be a partnership between your executive staff and your board of directors, but the board is really responsible for making sure that plans align with budgets and with long-term vision and goals. The board is also responsible for monitoring and strengthening programs and services. So if they see that you're investing a good portion of the annual budget into a program that is not flourishing, it is the responsibility of the board to say, hey, we need to take a look at this, we need to evaluate it, and we perhaps need to walk away from it if it is not, in fact, serving our mission. The board also ensures legal and ethical integrity. This is why directors and officers insurance exists, right? A board is a legal entity. They are charged with very serious responsibilities, and they have to make sure that the staff, the donors, everyone involved in a nonprofit organization is acting according to all the state, federal, county laws, right? Your board is also responsible for enhancing the organization's public standing. So what does that mean? We're talking about PR. We're talking about being ambassadors and advocates. They're expected to be out in the community that you serve, networking, connecting with people, introducing their friends and family and colleagues to the work you do, right? They are supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders and fans and shining stars for you, external facing. The board is also responsible for building a competent board, right? They aren't passive in their roles. They should not be told by the executive director who's going to be next on the board. They should be actively involved in both recruitment and training for existing board members. Your board is also responsible for ensuring adequate financial resources, right? Determining and authorizing the need for funds, approving your annual budget, determining the purpose for funds. So if they want to establish an endowment, if they want to have a capital project, right? They are the body that gets to authorize if and how that will happen. As part of their financial responsibilities, they will also determine investment strategies and select the companies or organizations that will manage those funds, right? Your board is also, they're going to approve funding for any sort of staff recommendations, right? So if you need to hire on more people, if you need to work with external consultants, that is all things that fall to the board ensuring adequate financial resources. And then they are charged with protecting the assets of the organization and providing proper financial oversight, right? So this is, all the annual requirements that the IRS has for nonprofit organizations. It really falls to your board of directors to ensure that the agency is following all of those guidelines, doing the annual audit, getting all the paperwork in on time. So I went over all of those things because board service is a very big deal, right? It shouldn't be taken lightly. Once we have recruited incredible people to serve our agency's mission in this kind of very serious role, we want to make sure that we retain them, right? This is like a marriage, right? This is not casual dating. This is, we're going all in, and it's a very deep, serious, loyal relationship. So a few quick tips about how we retain our great board members. They need to feel valued and respected, and that their time is respected, right? That means that as development professionals, we always show up to engage our board members really well prepared. It means that when we ask them to take part in things like stewardship activities, that it's not just, hey, can you send some thank you cards out? It's, I'm showing up in a non-COVID world, I'm showing up with the list with good contact information and the stationery and the stamps, and maybe I've even addressed the envelopes for them, right? Just making them feel really valued and that their time is valued. Good stewardship, right? Our board members should also be our major donors, right? Or they should at least be giving to their capacity. And we need to treat them the same way we would any major donor. We steward them, we make them feel that their investments are very much valued, very important, and that we want to keep them, happy and the relationship healthy. Board members need to stay connected to the mission. So that can mean a lot of different things. For me, the agency I represent full-time, a place called home, it is engagement in our programs, right? So we will do mission moments at every single board meeting where myself and or the director of programs and or the chief executive officer will share incredible stories that have happened in the last quarter, right? We also typically have photos, video if we can, right? But then we make them do real engagement. Right now in this virtual space, that's been a little tricky, right? Our campus has been closed for just over a year, and we've had to pivot all of our programs for our young members into an online format. At first, I was like, gosh, how am I going to keep my board members engaged? And then I realized they don't have to commute in crazy LA traffic. I'm pulling them into all kinds of stuff with the kids, right? So I have one of my board members who is a music executive popping in on studio, right? We have a recording studio at a place called Home. Music's a big part of what we do in terms of enrichment programming. But I have her popping into studio sessions and helping with songwriting, giving her sort of constructive criticism in the beat making class, right? So it's just getting creative about ways that we can continue to weave our board members into engagement opportunities with our direct services. Our board members, they need mentorship and support. Frequently, folks will make the mistake of thinking because someone is an expert in their field, someone that has an incredible network, they've made it, and that's why we want them as a board member, means that they pick everything up just with ease. And that's not the case. Just because they're an expert at what they do during the day in their profession doesn't make them an expert board member, and it doesn't make them an expert at nonprofits. They will be incredibly grateful if they're given that sort of support right off the bat. One thing that we do at a place called Home, and that I've suggested to many clients over the years, is to create kind of a board buddy system, right? So with brand new board members, you pair them up with somebody who's really seasoned. And it's just the person that they get to ask the stupid questions of, right? You prep them with things like, guidelines for how we conduct board meetings. My very newest board member in the last year is somebody that we onboarded during a pandemic. What did that mean? It meant that I called her up in advance of the meeting and talked her through like the Zoom session, made sure she was really comfortable using the platform, talked to her about how we manage breakout rooms, who would be in contact with the notes afterward, just all those silly little details that can make a person feel like you're really going the extra mile to accommodate them, right? Board members need ownership. So if you're conducting board meetings and folks are showing up and they're not voting on anything besides approving the minutes from the meeting prior, you're doing something wrong, plain and simple. Your board members need to feel like they're making decisions, that they're providing valuable feedback, that the input that they are giving and the time that they are spending is furthering your mission. And if that's not the case, I strongly encourage you to reevaluate why. It could be that, there's perhaps some missing trust between the board and the staff. It could be that somewhere down the line, the board became sort of passive observers of the mission delivery. And there's likely opportunity to deepen engagement and create an environment where they feel more connected, okay? And lastly, board members need training. So when I joined the team at a place called Home, I came in from a consulting perspective. I had been consulting full-time for 3 years. I thought I'd never go back to a full-time fundraiser position. And then my favorite client said, we really want you to stay. And so I said to the executive director and the board chair at the time, the only way it was going to happen is if it was a real partnership. And what I meant by that was that we were heading into a $20 million campus expansion campaign. And I was going to need to work with the board as if we were all on the same team, pushing for the same goal, almost as if we were all perhaps like the staff, right? So I walked into my first board meeting with a presentation ready about campaigns and how they work and what I would be doing. And I told them all, we're in this together. I am now your accountability partner and your coach, okay? So I'm not gonna expect you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. And I'm never gonna ask you to go out and solicit donations without us having talked through every step of the process to a point where you are tired of listening to me and you just want to get out the door and ask for money. So what does that mean? We really dug into training, right? It wasn't just me providing training. It was also our programs team coming in and educating the board in a way we never had done before about the depth and the scope of our programs, so that when they were in meetings, they felt really confident in their ability to respond. And it also deepened the trust, right? Those training opportunities deepened the trust between the staff and the board, so that when we would pair up and go to donor meetings, if they couldn't answer a question, if the board member was stumped, they could very graciously defer to the staff member that they trusted completely, okay? Okay, so all of that is great, but occasionally you will have a problem board member. Someone whose heart just isn't in it, perhaps, or maybe there's something going on in their life that's really negatively affecting their participation. So common problems that we see with problem board members: low attendance, or they do show up, but they just never engage or speak. Perhaps they engage too much and they're argumentative. They bring a hostile energy to the room even. Or worst case scenario, they're actually rude and overtly showing sort of signs of disrespect or lack of interest in, what's happening in the room. So there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to this type of problem, but I will say this. You want to make sure you've got a board president who is, beyond anything else, committed to the mission and will make decisions and have difficult conversations that are completely based on doing what is best for the organization, right? Because if we're able to focus on that the priority is always what's best for our organization, asking people that are displaying this type of behavior to leave is never a tough decision to make, right? Now, I realize that's easier said than done. One thing we want to make sure that we have at hand to ensure that this process is a little bit easier if it does happen to be something we have to contend with is that our organization's bylaws have standards about conduct, right? And not only how we conduct ourselves as board members and staff, but also term limits. Because sometimes when people aren't just overtly disrespectful, but perhaps they're disengaged, having term limits in place defaults an opportunity to ask that person to move on, right? Okay, so we just want to make sure that when we're adding these things to our bylaws, we make sure the organization's policy aligns with our state regulations. And that's all information that's easy to find via Google or your friendly neighborhood attorney. So let's see. This is a great note. So before we decide to just kick folks off of the board, right, we want to make sure we've done everything in our power to ensure that there hasn't been a challenge in our onboarding or in the experience that they're having as a board member, right? So perhaps it means organizing special education or a board workshop, an opportunity to get everybody together, build morale, re-energize our board members to recommit to the mission. And we might want to ask our more experienced board members to intervene in challenging situations, right? If there's that kind of positive peer pressure is always a really great thing, not only with problematic board members, but with fundraising, right? If we have a major campaign and we're trying to get certain folks on the board to step into these leadership investment positions, having another board member act as a mentor in that space is incredibly effective, right? Okay, so I've talked a lot about recruiting, onboarding, working our ways around problematic board members. At the end of the day, we work our way through all this stuff. And obviously I'm a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I always come to everything in nonprofit management with the lens of the fundraiser, right? For me, it always comes down to resourcing. So why is all of this so very important? Hopefully it's the reason we're all here today. Nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. What does that mean? Money matters, okay? In order to fulfill our missions, we need resources. That includes human resource, and all of that takes money, okay? We cannot escape the necessity of fundraising. So we, the staff, the volunteer leaders, all might as well get really comfortable with it. So good news, everyone can be a great fundraiser. Okay, we just need to do a few things. We have to establish from the start that fundraising is an expected activity. Today we're talking about our boards. But now that I'm 20 years into a nonprofit career, I can tell you that, in my opinion, again, fundraisers lens, establishing from the start that fundraising is an expected activity or that everyone has a role in philanthropy is something that I would do for all staff as well, okay? When it comes to our board, we want to make it clear that every single board member is capable of participating in fundraising, even if they're like, there's no way I will ever ask for a gift. I just can't do it. That's okay. As we all know, right, there's 8 steps to the cause selling cycle. Just one of them is the ask. Those other 7 steps are all space that we can have board members play a really important role in. Okay. If you are a fundraising professional, not a board member, and you're here with us today, I want to make sure that you are always thinking about how can I better manage up, right? You have a role as a mentor to the board, as that partner, that trusted ally. Okay, you want to like move away from the mystery of fundraising by breaking it down in simple, clear tasks, right? You always want to walk away from your interactions with board members with established action items. Action items, deadlines, and a follow-up. For instance, let's say I've just hung up talking to Tom, and Tom's action item is to make an introduction to his friend Jen, who is the vice president of their company, because he's going to help me solicit a corporate sponsorship. Okay. His action item is to send an email and place a follow-up phone call to Jen. He's going to do it by Friday at noon. And he knows that I'm going to call Monday morning to make sure it's happened, right? Simple, clear tasks. We want to make sure that when we're giving them these simple, clear, executable tasks, that we're also spending time to draw the line back to how those little tasks are adding up to our bigger picture, right? Making sure that Tom understands that that $10,000 corporate sponsorship is going to help fund X, Y, and Z program this year. And that program is part of our strategic pillars for the next 3 years, right? This is super important. The best thing we can do with our board members to make them stronger and more confident fundraisers is to teach them the case, the pitch, the story, how we talk about our mission and the way that we execute our work, right? Teach them to get comfortable talking about the case. My biggest tip on this one is to one-on-one and in a group, ask the board members to share their why. Why are you here? What drew you to this organization? Why are you serving in this capacity, right? That is because they will tell you what the emotional trigger is for them around the case. And you also be able to establish with them, by reflecting back what you hear, ways that they can really ramp up the story component that you know will resonate with others, right? So whenever I do board trainings, I will come in and do a very abbreviated version of tell me your why, and I'll go around the room. And by the time you get to the last board member, everybody's in that energy, right? Everybody's reconnected with what got them all revved up in the first place and committing to being a volunteer leader. Okay. All right, let's do our first community share. So hopefully a few of the words I've said have triggered some thoughts for you. In the chat, let us know, what's the biggest barrier that your board has to overcome to be successful fundraisers or more successful?
So please feel free to type in the chat. I've opened that up, or in the Q&A. Before, as you all are typing, we do have a couple of questions, Hannah, that I think would be great to answer right now. Speaking of kind of what you were just talking about in teaching the board, do you have any suggestions for offering an effective board workshop in the virtual world? I can also.
There we go. I
There you
couldn't
go.
unmute. Okay. An effective board workshop in the virtual world. Like, are we talking about topics or just engagement? So I'll give a few hot tips. Hopefully this is what you're looking for. A couple of things that we do with our board of directors at a place called Home currently, because that's the only one. Well, that's not true. I was going to say it's the only one that I've worked with in the pandemic, but that's not true. We have established rules of engagement on Zoom. So when we're going and doing a place called Home board meeting, we know that it is cameras on, that it is everyone's microphone is muted unless you are speaking, that we use the chat to parking lot or placehold conversation items that we want to make sure we touch on. And we have a facilitator or a moderator, right, in the executive assistant for our CEO who serves to, you know, preview the chat, make sure we're keeping up on any items that aren't getting covered. Okay, so we just agreed upon rules of engagement so that we can ensure that everybody is staying present, right, and getting an opportunity to dig in and speak. During the pandemic, we've brought in a number of outside speakers or consultants to our board meetings. We have a really active board that meets quarterly, but then we have 5 board subcommittees that meet monthly. And most board members serve on 2 committees. So that's, you know, our board members are getting touched by a place called Home almost once a week, which is quite a lot. But, you know, they're really active, they're really engaged, and they feel like they're getting a lot of value out of their time with us. We've brought in experts around what we call JEDI work at a place called Home: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. That same speaker also did a session with our entire staff, and it looks like they're going to be coming on as a longer term consultant, right? We've brought in an expert to talk about secession planning. I won't say more about that right now, but super important for our agency at this point in our evolution. So, you know, having external experts come in is always great. There's this third-party sort of validation that can happen with topics that you're discussing at the board level. I hope that's helpful.
We got a lot of answers in for our community share, so I'll start reading them off. A lot of the answers for biggest barriers are communication, lack of confidence, fearing the ask and not knowing how to do the ask. We have some say that we have a lot of new board members who are brand new and nervous. Barrier in establishing the why for fundraising. Some people mention having it all being very disorganized and not understanding how the nonprofit functions. Again, some more barriers are some people are introverts and they don't like talking to other people. Barriers include engaging with donors and learning how to make an ask. Some are in a brand new organization and they're having trouble with having board members agree to bring in 3 donors each. That could be a good start.
There's a great note there from Jeannie Schmelzer. Thank you, Jeannie. Engaging with donors and learning more about how to make an ask. Best to partner with the executive director or director of development to go on calls together to help them build confidence. Teamwork makes the dream work, especially when we're talking about newer board members or those that believe themselves to be introverts that can't speak to people, especially about fundraising, right? Having multiple sets of ears in the room and multiple voices to speak when the conversation can get challenging or nerves get involved is super helpful. There's a lot of good stuff in the chat. I wish I could see all of you so I could ask a million questions to help you really dig into some of these. Christine, were there a few you wanted to point out?
A lot of others say some of our board members feel as if their network doesn't include the type of person who fits their image of a donor. I think that's a very interesting comment.
That's a really interesting one. Yeah, I saw another comment also about not a lot of capacity or networks, to which I lovingly respond, I don't believe it. And what I mean by that is that we live in a time that is more connected than ever before. Hot tip, if your board members are telling you, I don't have the network, they don't have capacity, make sure you're connected with those people on LinkedIn, your board members, and then troll their lists. I do it all the time. I tell my board members I'm going to do it. When I meet them, I say, okay, so I'm sending you a LinkedIn connection now. The next time we meet, I'm going to bring you a list of people I want you to introduce to us. Okay. So it's like the onus of responsibility is on the development professional to get out there and prospect, right? But it may sound like that's creating like a pressure situation for the board member, but it's really not. You're helping cut through their thoughts around like, I don't have time for this. I've asked everybody I already know. Um, you know, I don't know who has capacity. I don't want to talk to my friends about money. Like you take all those thoughts that are blocking their energy towards investing and really doing the prospecting work, and you're just streamlining the whole thing for them and coming to them with suggestions. It's so much easier to edit or to review suggestions than it is to start from zero and just draft the original, right? Okay, let's see, I'm just reading a few more. Could I speak more about succession planning? Let's maybe circle back to that at the end. Thanks, Jeannie.
And thank you everyone who are asking questions in the Q&A. Please keep continuing to do so. We will be getting to the questions at the end, so we are saving those.
Great. Okay, thank you, Christine. We're going to keep moving, but remember, I'm going to leave time for lots of questions at the end, so we're going to come back. Great share outs. Thank you so much for your engagement. Okay, so just talked a little bit about how there's a role for everyone in the fundraising process, right? So we have 4 key roles that I think is a smart way to sort of think about things. We've got our prospectors, right? Those that are identifying potential donors, our cultivators. Those are our board members that can help engage and excite and host, right? In a non-COVID world, they're the people that we ask to host a cocktail party or some sort of salon event at their home, perhaps. They're the networkers, the party people, right? Then there's our solicitors. Those are the people that we will actually partner with to make the ask. These are the few gems that we always find that are like, I don't mind talking about money. I'd love to ask for money. That's great. I'm great at that. They're people who are in sales, right, for a living. They're people that have lots and lots of experience, so they've built up that confidence in fundraising. And they're, candidly, as a fundraiser, they're the ones that I'm always like, yes, I love working with you. Okay. And then there's our stewards. Stewards should be every single one of your board members. And those are the people that we deploy to say thank you, right? Whether it be email, phone, snail mail, postcards, creating a video to send out, in person. Everyone should be able to say thank you. The best way to work with our stewards is to give them, again, actionable directions and great lists to work with, and any keynotes about that donor relationship that they should have to make it a really meaningful thank you. Okay. Digging in a little bit deeper. So our board members can play a really key role in identifying prospects who have links to our organization. So affinity for our cause, right? We know that based on a conversation we've had or work we've seen someone do out in the community, that they may have an interest in what our mission is. Identifying prospects should be a board requirement for all new board members that we talk about when we're recruiting. Okay, and it should be listed, excuse me, in our board member agreements, right? So they help us identify good donors, both on the corporate front and on the individual front. And also on, the foundation side of things, if they have relationships at institutions that do grant making, that is also great prospecting. They give us names. Perhaps they also help us do the sleuthing, right? So if they have a really big network, we can bring them names and they can help us identify third parties that can get us engaged with the individuals we seek to meet, okay? So a good note here, the best prospectors are the people that really enjoy connecting the dots. I always like to joke that I'm good at fundraising because I was destined to be a matchmaker, right? Like I'm really good at meeting people and being like, this person over here and this person over here would bring tremendous value to each other. I'm going to make an introduction. Okay. That's what we want from our board members that we identify as prospectors. We want them to always be thinking not only about our organization that they're serving as a board member for, but also about how they can create, mutual benefit in introducing people to the organization and to other board members and staff members, et cetera. Okay. Our cultivators, again, these are our party people, right? They're going to be informing our prospective donors about our programs, our services. They're really a central ingredient to long-lasting relationships, right? And they're really, really good with interacting not just with their peers on the board, but their peers in the community. They're, the consummate host. They really love just sort of chatting up the organization to anybody they come in contact with, okay? So it's almost like your prospectors will identify and invite, and your cultivators are the people that they could talk to anybody about your mission, right? They're just the life of the party. They're going to make sure they ask you a ton of questions, right? If you were the prospect, your cultivators are the ones that are going to circle back to the development team to say, I had this incredible conversation with this person at the cocktail reception. Here's what we talked about. They want more information on XYZ program, right? They're that sort of ace in the hole when it comes to intel gathering, okay? Great. Your solicitors, again, these are the folks that aren't afraid to ask for the money, right? When they're properly trained, your board members can be amazing solicitors because they come to a solicitation with a sense of authority, right? That your prospects will likely really take to. We have them engage in donor meetings, in placing phone calls to donors. At lower levels or like sort of early solicitation activity, we would have them sign on to requests or letters, right? So lending their name to the solicitation, perhaps with institutional donors. We have them take personal meetings with donors. And again, as Jeannie pointed out, ideally with the staff as a teammate, right? So that someone who works day in and day out in the operations of the organization always sort of has eyes and ears on the relationship as it's being developed and on the solicitations that have happened and what the result was, okay? So with our great solicitors, the folks that love asking for money, the one sort of, just a tip from my experience is you never want to impose so much on a solicitor that they don't want to ask anymore, but you do want to make them your best friend early on so that you're always aware as the development professional of who they're asking and for what, okay? Because we might have really clearly defined ideas of the gifts that we have mapped out for our major donors, the requests we plan to make for the year. And if your solicitor happens to see that person in passing prior to perhaps your scheduled lunch date or Zoom date at this point, they may jump the gun or they may ask for something that's unrelated to what you had in mind. You just want to make sure that you're aligning and keeping those lines of communication open so that you as the fundraising professional or perhaps you as the board chair, if I'm speaking to the volunteers on this session, you always are clear on what's out there in the community being requested of individual donors, okay? And our stewards. So the folks that say thank you, it should really be every single one of our board members has a piece of this puzzle, right? We can segment our donors, right, into groups, and based on the demographics of that group, perhaps it's gift amount, perhaps it's the location of where they live, perhaps it's the area of interest they contributed to. They can be parceled out to our steward board members, right? So that maybe there's a connection point there that the board member ends up having a conversation about. So let's say at a place called home, we do a special campaign every summer that's specifically focused on our arts programs, right? So I've got, that board member I brought up earlier who's a music industry executive. I'd probably give her a list of all the major donors that contributed to the campaign and say, hey, Susan, here's your list of 12 major donors, their gift amount, which arts program they gave to. Here's your script. I would love for you to try calling all of those folks over the next 2 weeks to say thank you and maybe have a conversation about why you love the arts programming at a place called home. If they answer, see how that instantly sets her up to have really rich conversations that could potentially move the needle on that relationship for our organization. Okay, so I kind of just talked through that. Scripts are great, giving them exactly the materials that they need to execute as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's a really good note. I'm glad I'm using these slides. Sending a handwritten thank you note, offering to have further engagement is always a really important piece of the puzzle when it comes to stewarding, particularly with the board members. You want to make sure if you're asking your board members to offer up personal interaction following that thank you, that they're on board with scheduling their time out in that way, right? You don't just want to sort of force it on them. But if they are, give them suggested engagements, right? So here we've got it outlined as like lunch, coffee, dinner dates. I always ask my board members when we're in a non-COVID world, when you wrap up a phone call, send an email, write that thank you note, close it out with, I'd love to host you on campus, right? Bring them down to see their investment in action. And then, Susan shows up with donor X and Hannah's there to host them around and make sure they have an incredible time and get all their questions answered. Feels like a much lighter lift to both the board member and the donor. Okay. How are we doing on time? Pretty good. Okay, so let's do another community share. Take a quick moment, a little self-reflection. So we just talked through sort of the 4 roles of fundraising for our board members: prospectors, cultivators, solicitors, and stewards. I'd like to know if you've identified steps that you can take to set up your board members in these roles for greater success. What are maybe two of the steps that you've identified? And you can place those in the chat.
And one question that we did have, Hannah, was someone mentioned it sounds like development is the key for board relationships. Are there other programs and departments that you would maybe recommend, or are they not as important, would you say?
Oh no, super important. I like to call it the culture of philanthropy, right? And in my humble opinion, that is key to a successful organization, period. So while it is the responsibility of your development team or staff member to make sure that the fundraising initiatives are organized appropriately and that prospecting work is being done and that everything's being recorded, et cetera, and that your donors are being properly receipted and stewarded. It's really the entire organization's responsibility to make sure that appropriate resources are flowing in, and that the people being asked to invest in the mission feel a sense of connection. Okay, so let me try to break that down a little bit. What I mean by that is our programs team at a place called home, when, again, non-COVID world, when that donor meeting would happen and that new person would come to campus with a board member and I'm shepherding them around campus and telling them about the programs, I'm not walking into the recording studio and pretending I don't see a room full of kids and incredibly talented instructors and ignoring them. I walk into that live session, take a beat, and when I get I've already prepared my colleague in the room that's teaching that there's a tour coming through and that I'd love for him to take 2 minutes to say something. We do this so much at our agency that we're at like an expert level with it, and some magic always happens. So I walk them into a recording studio, that instructor pauses, welcomes them into the room, and then puts one of the kids on the spot, right? And that's why it's magic, because then you get an incredible 14-year-old showing off their musical talents to a complete stranger, and it's just a party, right? Everybody falls in love. It's great. So that's just a real world example of how, as an agency, we work as a team, right? And it's taken a lot of intentional work on my part as the person who oversees fundraising to steward my other staff members, to make sure that the team feels like the time that I ask them to take away from teaching the kids is such an important investment of time, and the return on that time investment is so high that they're happy to do it, right? They see the connection between temporary slight disruptions and huge resources to continue fulfilling our mission. They get it. So it's everybody's responsibility, but
Yes.
development really has to drive it. Okay.
And looks like we have a lot of steps that people are going to take after this webinar. Some people are saying training and scripts to
Great.
show, having them participate in a cultivation workshop to help them and to think of names that they would be willing to share the mission and passion with their organization. Oh, surveying the board to have them self-identify their strengths. Love that.
I love that.
Someone loves your tip of looking into their LinkedIn and their network and to bring a list for introductions.
Excellent.
Asking the board how they like to be thanked and stewarded, and then have a conversation at the board meeting or development committee about how to thank and steward the donors based off of that, and give them some examples to get their input, perhaps identify or the board member to take ownership for stewardship and work with them to present the plan to the board. Then we have personal calls and meetings with all board of directors to reorient members following the org's merger and going all virtual. 2 is asking their why. That's great. And again, developing scripts and training.
Awesome. Very, very good. All good stuff. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. With that, Christine, shall I turn it to you for a second before we dive into Q&A?
Yes, please. So thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. As you may have seen in some of our emails, this webinar will now go into a 30-minute Q&A and open discussion. So please feel free to stick around. We've saved all of your questions and we'll be going into those now. But in case you have to leave for another virtual meeting that you may or may not have, I would just like to remind everyone that we do have another webinar coming up next month. If you are interested, it will be Lessons Learned Fundraising During COVID-19 that will be presented by Sharon Goodson. So again, thank you to those of you who have joined us, and thank you so much for your engagement. We're gonna jump right into the Q&A now. Awesome. So looking at this, we have a couple questions that we can just dive on into. One question for you, Hannah, is how long should board terms last? So someone says that they have someone on their board that has been a member for over 10 years.
Yeah. So Board Source is a really great resource for all kinds of questions around best practices with boards. That's BOARD, SOURCE. Quick answer, 2 to 3 years renewable is what I recommend. At a place called Home, we have 2 board members that have been on the board for 20 years. They have renewed their terms 10 times. So, yeah. But again, that's sort of like a escape valve, if you will, right? Having board terms in place. Okay.
And another short, quick question would be, how many board of director members do you suggest?
It depends on the size of the organization, really. There's no hard and fast rule. You should have at least 3, right? The bigger the organization, the bigger the budget, the more people you're going to want, but you want to make sure it never gets to a size that's unmanageable. You can get creative, right? Perhaps you have a governing board of directors that's 21 people, and that's the max you want to be able to manage. But you have a ton of folks in the community that you want to have volunteer leadership roles. I recommend creating things like advisory bodies, right? So they don't have the same legal responsibilities. They don't have the same sort of oversight or the fiscal requirements, but perhaps they're providing expertise, additional financial resources, opening their networks, right?
All right, next question. This is great. Does diversity, equity, inclusion need to be included into the bylaws?
I love that Jeannie already provided an answer for that. Most boards are starting to incorporate these things in the policies and procedures. It definitely could be put in the bylaws, yes. Does it need to be is a matter of opinion at this point. My opinion is yes. But, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, that is a kind of new revelation of the sector. So I encourage it.
Moving on down. So what are your recommendations for fostering a culture of accountability for task development and implementation?
Ooh. Jeannie's doing all the hard work for me. This is great. I assume that this means I'm making a lot of assumptions here. I wish we could talk. So task development implementation, you're going to need to identify a specific board member who this is their strength, right? If you want it to be a peer-to-peer accountability, ideally it's one of your officers, right? Your chair, your co-chair, your secretary, your treasurer, and or the fundraising executive is the person that sort of holds that space, which also means that they need to show up prepared every single time, right? You can't ask your board members to always be delivering on deadline and executing to task if your staff member that's involved in the accountability part of that isn't also doing the same, right? So I guess the 2 hot tips are figure out how your development staff can work with a board member to take on that role of like champion of accountability and create a matrix, if you will, for how the board will engage around task execution. Hope that's helpful.
We have a couple questions all relating to each other slightly, of people who have board members who are saying that they're too busy or aren't even able to communicate with them because they're not maybe answering emails or phone calls. So how would you address something like that with too busy board members or board members who just aren't engaging?
I'm going to assume that this question is coming from a staff member and not a peer board member, and my recommendation would be to get their peers involved, right? So if you have a board member who's non-responsive, that is a challenge that your board president should be helping you deal with. If the problem person is your board president, and you're not the CEO or executive director, you need them to partner with you on getting that person to behave as everyone has been asked to. Yeah, that's really get a third person to help get you the connection you need is the short answer.
A little bit more. I'm just reading through all these questions. Let's see. Speaking of board president, someone did ask, what if you have two co-founders? Should they both be on the board? Also, should you appoint a president of the board, and how do you decide which founder should assume that role? Interesting.
Two co-founders, should they both be on the board? Huh. I have so many questions on this. If it's an early, if the organization is early in its evolution, yes, it's totally appropriate to have the two co-founders on the board. Yes, you need to appoint a president. How do you decide which founder should assume that role? I would, this is just my opinion, I would encourage the founder with the strongest organizational skills, who will be the best accountability partner, into that role. So yeah, I would look at the individual sort of strengths and weaknesses and ask the co-founders to make a decision about who really should step into that president space.
Background noise. I have a helicopter flying by.
Sorry?
I have a helicopter flying by, excuse that background noise that just happened. But we did have a couple people asking more about some more creative ways beyond monthly newsletters, phone calls, and thank you notes to show donor appreciation and stewardship.
Oh, goodness. Can you pull up our Fundraising Academy session notes? Talk to your peers, right? If you're looking for creative ways to thank your donors, the best thing you can do for yourself is to talk to your colleagues in the field. We don't need to recreate the wheel, just spend a little time together. I lived and worked in San Diego for 7 years. I moved back to Los Angeles, my hometown, in late 2017. And one of the first things I did was reconnect with people locally who were also director of developments, senior development professionals. And now I've got this, excuse me, brain trust of about 8 colleagues, and we meet monthly. And all we do is exchange ideas and borrow from each other's toolkits. And it's insanely valuable. So that's my best piece of advice on that front. The other thing I'll say is think multimedia, right? If you have access. So I'm a little bit out of the demographic that like grew up on social media. Like I had a MySpace account, guys, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get TikTok. But I have people in my organization on my communications team that do, right? So I go to them and I say, what can we do that's creative, that won't cost us anything, and that's really fun? And they're like, we'll make a TikTok thank you video with the kids. And I'm like, great, do it. It's like, leverage the people around you for their brilliant ideas. Try things, be willing to fail fast, meaning like if it didn't work, okay, we tried that, let's move on to something else.
And then something that you alluded to a lot during your presentation, someone is asking, could you speak more about succession planning?
That is a very, very loaded topic. So I'm not sure what I can say about that in a short period of time, but succession planning, meaning, the transition of executive staff or board members. If that person who asked that question, are they able to add additional notes? I'm curious about if you're asking specific to staff, secession of board members?
Yes, whoever asked that question, I believe it was a Gretchen. If you are here or if someone else also has that question, please feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. Let me see.
Can I answer this one that I just saw pop up? Thoughts on forming a fundraising committee of the board? Yes, yes, yes. Why is the fundraising committee so great? It is a little additional work for the senior fundraiser on staff, right? Because you have to manage that group. But it's fantastic because it's a body of the board that gets to be the champions and cheerleaders for all things fundraising, right? So it's almost like you've got your own like inside team in the board of directors that can help push out everything that you're trying to message. So I highly recommend it. Be really intentional about who you recruit to it though, right? Like if you've got a board member who says, I hate fundraising, I don't ever want to do it, don't let them sit on the fundraising committee. You don't need that energy. Okay. But yes, big fan.
Gretchen did comment back that she was referring to executive director succession.
Okay. Yeah. So Gretchen, I would encourage you to email me offline and I can chat through some things that I've learned over the years. Really and truly, the most important thing is to think about, from a fundraising perspective, institutional partners in particular, so foundations, when they know that an executive director or CEO is moving on, some of them have it in their sort of funding guidelines that they will take a break from funding an organization just to kind of let the smoke clear and see what the new leadership wants to do. One, between all of us on the screen, I think that's a horrible practice, and I think it's a great disadvantage to the sector. My opinion aside, as a fundraiser, the way to plan for that is to talk about it and gear up like really intentional fundraising campaigns around secession, right? Like we've got to work on normalizing sustainability of funding no matter what. So that might mean we've got to replace a certain amount of foundation grants with individual funding, with corporate dollars. So it's really like getting ahead of what could be kind of bumpy change management, right? But again, I'll pop my email up in a second. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to just kind of chat through your specific situation.
Let's see. Another question is, as a new director of development in the middle of a merger, what is the best way to have my first contact with the new board that are coming together as one?
Ooh, new director, middle of a merger. There's probably a lot to unpack there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would just go in, tell yourself, I am the trusted advisor. You're walking in as an expert with knowledge to share, right? And maybe work with your executive leadership team and perhaps I'm curious to know, is there like one identified board chair at this point? Like it would be great to get with somebody someone within the board structure that you can build an allyship with and talk through, the best things that you can bring in early to make sure folks feel more comfortable and taken care of. Mergers are tough, right? You're bringing together two bodies that probably don't know each other that well. Hopefully, if they do, you've got a few champions in the mix. There might be hard feelings. There's a lot to navigate there. But yeah, if you could get with other executive leadership to kind of strategize around how to make the experience feel really not awkward, that would be ideal, right? Maybe it's having an education session or moment at that very first board meeting. Maybe it's having a really, like maybe you are the facilitator for a really direct conversation about what are our biggest concerns, like do a SWOT analysis around fundraising, right? Hope that's helpful.
Let's see. This is from, I believe, the same person who was shared during the community share about their biggest barriers is we are a brand new organization. They have a 50K match to help bring in new donors, and the board agreed. Okay, so the board agreed to each bring in 3 donors of any size, yet they aren't doing it. I give updates on where we are, have written talking points, yet nothing. Help. And there is an exclamation point.
Okay, so 50K match to help bring in new donors. Board agreed to each bring in 3 donors, and they're not doing it. Did the 50K match, it must have come from a board member, I'm guessing? I'm just curious about what sort of peer pressure is available to you to help activate, right? Or if you are a board member or if you are a staff member, right? It kind of shifts the dynamics. Really, it sounds to me like you probably have several board members that need some coddling, some one-on-one support, some partnership around prospecting. It's probably going to be pretty time intensive, but you're a brand new organization. So this type of time intensive one-on-one work is probably a really great investment to set you up for the future, right? Again, trolling people's LinkedIn, looking for folks that might be helpful, bringing them suggested lists. That's always, good catalysts for conversation to identify people who are prospective donors.
Hopefully that answered your question, Julia. Feel free to raise your hand if you're comfortable with unmuting and let us know. Another question, let's see. We have a couple people asking if you have any examples or resources that you can point them to view either a board member agreement contract or more examples of scripts that you mentioned before.
Yeah, it looks like Jeannie responded. Thank you so much, Jeannie, to the board member agreement contract. In case you folks aren't aware, if you are based in San Diego, Jeannie Schmelzer, longtime senior consultant, Netzel Grisby, longtime AFP San Diego leader. So she's an incredible resource. I think I saw that she jumped off earlier, but her email is right there. So anything Association of Fundraising Professionals related, Jeannie can get you those resources quickly. But yeah, board member agreements, AFP, board source. You can just try Google. Honestly, there's a ton. I have templates for everything, and you can feel free to reach out to me via email. But those are board agreements, bylaws. In terms of scripts, I have things I can share, but my hot tips on scripting your board members is bullet points. Like, don't write them out a full monologue, right? Give them bullet points. Make it brief. Encourage them to use the donor's name several times in a phone call or email, etc. Right? I mean, you have a script. It's the thank you email that you as the fundraising professional would send, right? Just take that, break it apart into bullet points, give it to your board member to use, right? But yes, if you need more meaty substance, feel free to email me.
Thank you, Hannah. And it looks like we only have 2 questions left, which is perfect for the amount of time we have.
Great.
So first is, I'm a vice president of a board that started out 7 to 8 years ago and started as a social support group sort of board. It has grown significantly and is being asked to transition to be a fundraising board. How do we politely communicate this to members?
I love that you said politely.
Politely.
you talk about the importance of being properly resourced, right? What it really comes down to at the end of the day is um, it's the reality of the world that we live in. In order to deliver our mission, we have to have sustainable revenue streams, and it starts at the top, right? You should expect to see some attrition with this kind of shift, right? In my, obviously, again, fundraiser lens, right? From my perspective, every board, every nonprofit board is a fundraising board, but a lot of organizations don't think that way when they start out, and they don't message it that way. And people who found themselves to be in volunteer leadership positions and have provided hopefully tremendous value in their expertise and their network, et cetera, over the years, can feel like they no longer belong, right? That's sad, and it makes room for the people that you need to have in place for the next phase of your organization's evolution, right? So I would approach it from the perspective of, we need to be properly resourced. We're going to give you all of the training tools and partnership that you need to be successful as a fundraiser on the board of directors. And you have an opportunity to make space for new leadership if that's not of interest to you. But you should, you can say all of that with love and find somebody who opts out of board leadership a different kind of role in the organization, right? You don't have to say goodbye permanently. It's just sort of a alteration of the current relationship. And one more hot tip on that, if that feels painful, well, painful is the wrong word. If it feels impossible, consider bringing in an outside consultant or a respected peer in the space, somebody that serves on another nonprofit board who is already bought into that idea and can message it to your board members as a impartial third party.
Yeah, and last question, and we did not leave the easiest for the last, unfortunately, but in the interest of decolonizing wealth, is EID or DI, and I know you mentioned JEDI, JEDI, just a hot topic or a shift in long-term philosophy? Definitely a loaded question.
Yeah. And I wish I had the answer, but I don't. Okay, I'm going to try to be elegant in this articulation. I feel like it's only going to be a shift in long-term philosophy if nonprofit leaders, board members included, and fundraising professionals really own the important the important role that we play in justice work, right? I've been doing fundraising for a really long time, and there's a lot of times that I've questioned, like, am I actually perpetuating inequities in a way by supporting the celebration of individuals who might have a ton of capacity but have made their money from essentially oppressing other people, right? That's the hard, true facts of thoughts that I have. We have choices. We have choices in the matter. We as fundraisers have access to people with tremendous wealth. So where I'm at now in my career is figuring out how I use my voice to speak truth to the mission that I'm currently raising resources for. I'm a very vocal activist in the social justice space in Los Angeles. And I feel like every fundraiser should really see their role as way more than just resource development. Like, we really are we walk this interesting line of having the deep connection to mission and service and the connection to the people with the capacity who perhaps really need to hear the message about where we're at. So I don't have the answer. Everything in my body hopes and prays that it's not a trendy thing and that it is the future and that we're headed in the right direction. So.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you also everyone for your participation in both the Q&A and our community shares. We are so grateful for you all, and just a reminder that you will be receiving this all in with a link to access the slide deck and the recording. I'd like to thank our presenter Hannah for taking the time to share your experiences and offering such great advice for donor board engagement and answering all of these questions. So thank you. If you'd like to contact Hannah, her information is available to you on the screen. And again, we will be providing this slide deck. And before we close, I just want to mention again, thank you everyone for your time and participation. If you could please answer the survey that will pop up onto your screen, that will greatly help us to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure that we're providing value to you all as an audience. I'd love to give Hannah, you the last words, if you'd like to end us off with maybe your big nugget of advice or key takeaways.
First, I want to say thank you to you, Christine. I always love working with you and seeing you, and to the Fundraising Academy. I hope that everybody that joined us today and stuck around got a lot of value out of this, and that you are walking away with some new action items. Last nugget, your board members should be your best friends. So love on them, give them the tools and partnership that they need and crave. And I wish you abundance and good fortune. And yeah, hopefully we're headed towards better times. Congratulations to all of you to surviving the last year. We need our sector to be strong more than ever. So thank you for investing time in your continued professional development. And I hope you enjoyed today.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.